The Collapse of Evolution by Scott M. Hughes. Forward. The theory of evolution has dominated our society for about a century, especially in our educational institutions. The media has been most influential in promoting the fact of organic evolution, with some television programs and magazine editorial sections loyally devoted to the evolutionary viewpoint. Usually, this indoctrination is obvious and insistent, but even when it is more subtle, it is nevertheless unmistakably effective. Our current social and moral problems are largely a result of the humanistic philosophy which has been spawned by evolutionary thinking. The so-called new morality we are presently witnessing is actually no morality, the inevitable result of the atheistic evolutionary philosophy. Indeed, there are virtually no areas of thought and life today which have remained impervious to the effects of this popular viewpoint. Ever since the Scopes trial, evolution has been universally accepted as fact, while at the same time biblical creationism has been generally discarded as an antiquated belief of a former age. Organized Christianity has spent the past century or so retreating and compromising before the onslaughts of the evolutionists. Consequently, the faith of many Bible-believing Christians has been seriously affected, and countless sincere people have been deceived. Students all over the world are taught the historical and scientific greatness of the disproof of spontaneous generation, life coming from non-living matter. Redi, Pasteur, and Spallanzani proved that life can only come from pre-existing life. Ideas such as mice coming from dirty undergarments were finally silenced. How ironic it is when these same educators turn right around and assert that spontaneous generation was the mechanism by which life arose. The modern concept of organic evolution, then, is actually nothing more than a refined regression to 16th century scientific mentality where spontaneous generation is again proposed. The irony of this whole situation is that the very concept of organic evolution is completely absurd and impossible. It is absolutely astonishing that an idea which is so devoid of any legitimate scientific evidence could have attained a position of such prestige in the name of science. Biblical creationism, however, has recently been revived and is gathering impressive momentum. Literally thousands of distinguished scientists are rejecting evolution in favor of creationism. Many states are considering including creationism in the science curricula, and numerous lectures and debates have been hosted on university campuses. The purpose of this book is basically threefold. First, to expose the scientific fallacies of the theory of organic evolution. Second, to present scientific evidence for biblical creationism. And third, to prove that evolution and biblical creationism are mutually exclusive and cannot be reconciled. It has been said that there are two kinds of people, those who agree with you and the bigots. There is no one so narrow as the poor, misguided fellow who disagrees with you, and a logical person is anyone who can prove that you are right. The point is that to one degree or another, we are all guilty of egocentrism. Although this is certainly true, I am nevertheless convinced that an honest seeker of the truth will eventually find it. With that in mind, I encourage the reader to proceed with an open mind and an honest heart. And ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. Jeremiah 29:13. Acknowledgements. The author wishes to express special appreciation to the following individuals and organizations who have helped with various aspects of the preparation of this manuscript. Illustrations, Janice Huss. Photography, NASA. Proofreading and manuscript reviewing, Lisa Edwards, Rick Fineout, Preston Snowman, Bill Taylor, Steve Wilbur. Layout and design, Bruce Casey. Typing, Lisa Edwards, Debbie Kiggins. A special word of recognition is also due to Dr. Henry M. Morris, for many years the head of the Department of Civil Engineering at Virginia Polytechnic Institute, and now director of the Creation Science Research Center, San Diego, California. Thanks to his original thinking and highly respected writings of the past decades, an impressive creation science foundation has been established. Finally, very special thanks are due to Bill Taylor, who initiated and encouraged publication of this manuscript, and to my loving wife, whose patience and encouragement have made this project a reality. Introduction. The most widespread and influential argument against the veracity of the Bible is the all-too-common belief that modern science has proven evolution, thereby discrediting the scriptural account of creation. The fatal flaw in this argument, however, is the fact that it is impossible to prove scientifically any theory of origins. This is because the very essence of the scientific method is based on observation and experimentation, and it is impossible to make observations or conduct experiments on the origin of the universe. This point is conceded by British biologist L. Harrison Matthews in the foreword to the 1971 edition of Darwin's Origin of Species. The fact of evolution is the backbone of biology, and biology is thus in the peculiar position of being a science founded on an unproved theory. Is it then a science or a faith? Belief in the theory of evolution is thus exactly parallel to belief in special creation. Both are concepts which believers know to be true, but neither, up to the present, has been capable of proof. Scientists may speculate about the past or future, but they can only actually observe the present. Obviously, then, the widespread assumption that evolution is an established fact of science is absolutely false. Thus, evolution can only be correctly labeled as a belief, a subjective philosophy of origins, the religion of many scientists. Despite this fact, most of today's scientists and teachers still insist that evolution is an established fact of science. Sir Julian Huxley, grandson of Thomas Henry Huxley, Darwin's bulldog, for example, pronounced in 1959 that the first point to make about Darwin's theory of evolution is that it is no longer a theory but a fact. No serious scientist would deny the fact that evolution has occurred, just as he would not deny the fact that the Earth goes around the sun. M.J. Kenny has stated, "Of the fact of organic evolution, there can at the present day be no reasonable doubt. The evidences for it are so overwhelming that those who reject it can only be the victims of ignorance or of prejudice." Professor George Gaylord Simpson assures us that Darwin finally and definitively established evolution as a fact. Quoting from a standard geology textbook, Essentials of Earth History, we read, "The fossil record furnishes irrefutable proof that life on Earth has changed through the ages. The systematic study of fossil remains cast an entirely new light on the past history of the Earth and did away with the old-fashioned and superstitious notions on the subject that has prevailed for thousands of years. Fossils prove not only that life has changed, but also that it has progressed from simplicity to complexity with the passage of time. These are the facts. To those who take an unbiased view of the matter, there is only one conclusion, that all past and present life has descended from simple beginnings." Even the Pope's own Pontifical Academy of Sciences has recently stated, "We are convinced that masses of evidence render the application of the concept of evolution to man and the other primates beyond serious dispute." While evolutionary scientists may differ about how evolution occurs, they do not disagree that it occurs. But we need to remember that scientists are human beings too. The notion that they are completely objective, detached, impartial, cold machines is of course absurd. The effects of prejudice and preconceived ideas, the influence of strong personal convictions, and the opinions of so-called experts influence them as much as anyone. Also, many scientists and teachers are unbelievers in biblical Christianity. As such, they are forced to accept a naturalistic explanation for the origin and destiny of life and the universe. All of these factors play an extremely important role in the widespread acceptance of the evolutionary theory. As Dr. George Wald, winner of the 1967 Nobel Peace Prize in Science, has written, "When it comes to the origin of life on this earth, there are only two possibilities: creation or spontaneous generation, evolution. There is no third way. Spontaneous generation was disproved 100 years ago, but that leads us only to one other conclusion, that of supernatural creation. We cannot accept that on philosophical grounds, personal reasons. Therefore, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance." Thus, we find that evolution is generally accepted to be a fact of science, not because it can be proven by scientific evidence, but because the only alternative is special creation, and that's totally unacceptable. Of course, not all scientists are atheistic evolutionists. In fact, some of the greatest pioneers in the history of science have been devoted Christians. A partial listing would include such names as Isaac Newton, Louis Pasteur, Johannes Kepler, Robert Boyle, Michael Faraday, Samuel Morse, Lord Kelvin, and James Maxwell. Still, other scientists have elected to favor a compromise position, commonly known as theistic evolution. Theistic evolutionists claim to believe in God and the Bible, while at the same time maintaining that all life has evolved from inorganic chemicals. But in accepting this curious concept, theistic evolutionists are forced to depart from, contradict, and compromise numerous biblical essentials. Typical of such disregard for the scriptures are the views of well-known Jesuit priest Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. However, Christians who truly believe the Bible to be the divinely inspired Word of God have no other recourse than to summarily dismiss and reject such a concept. Simply stated, evolution may be defined as an imagined process by which living things formed by themselves without a creator and then somehow improved by themselves. According to this belief, all bacteria, plants, animals, and humans have arisen by mere chance from a single remote ancestor that somehow came into existence. All of this is supposed to have occurred accidentally without the benefit of any intelligence or planning. The basic premise of this molecule-to-man theory is that hydrogen gas, given enough time, will eventually turn into people. Diametrically opposed to this viewpoint, biblical creationism postulates an initial special creation by God, through which all the laws, processes, and entities of nature were brought into existence as described in the book of Genesis. An important point worthy of contemplation is the fact that throughout history, every age has been beset with false ideas. For example, it was believed for 15 centuries that the sun and other planetary bodies revolved around the earth. This idea was known as the geocentric theory. And of course, we now know this supposition to be completely false. During the 17th and 18th centuries, another theory was universally accepted and taught as an established fact of science, in much the same way that evolution is today. This theory was known as the phlogiston theory. It stated that every substance which burned contained the magic ingredient phlogistotin, which gave it combustibility. This erroneous idea was later refuted by the French chemist Lavoisier, who demonstrated conclusively that oxygen was the key element involved in combustion. There are many other historical blunders of science which could be mentioned, but these should suffice to establish the fact that every age has been plagued with error. Are we to presume that we are any different or exempt from such folly? Is it possible that the theory of evolution is yet another blunder of science? In this book, we shall endeavor to demonstrate that this is indeed the case. But why bother to study origins anyway? Is it really worth all the time and energy? Well, there are many good reasons why it is important to have a correct understanding of origins, and yes, it is a worthwhile pursuit. Everyone needs a sense of identity, purpose, and personal goals. This is impossible without a sense of origin. What a person believes about his or her origin will condition that person's lifestyle and affect his or her ultimate destiny. The solution to man's massive social problems depend upon a correct understanding of origins. If the evolutionary philosophy is correct, then life is without moral direction and purpose. On the other hand, if we were created by God, our lives have meaning, direction, and purpose. Clearly, the proposition of origins is the foundation of all other convictions, actions, and beliefs. Thus, the question of origins is a vital issue that can be ignored only at great peril. Although both evolution and biblical creationism are inaccessible by the scientific method and must be accepted by faith, that is not to say that known scientific facts and observations are useless and to be discarded or ignored. On the contrary, scientific facts should be used to help ascertain which model of origins is more probable so that the invested faith is intelligent and not blind. In this book, we shall endeavor to demonstrate that the facts of science correlate much better with biblical creationism than with evolution, and that evolutionists are indeed in a most precarious position when sitting on the chair of the general theory of evolution, as expressed in the following poem. As I was sitting in my chair, I knew it had no bottom there, no legs or back, but I just sat, ignoring little things like that. Chapter 1, Geology. A. The Geologic Column and Timetable. 1. Introduction. Before the 19th century, the vast majority of scientists interpreted Earth history in terms of biblical creationism and catastrophism, the Genesis flood, and consequently believed in a relatively short time scale. However, the more recent acceptance of a principle known as uniformitarianism has successfully promoted the idea of an ancient Earth. Uniformitarianism is the belief that the origin and development of all things can be explained exclusively in terms of the same natural laws and processes operating today. According to this dogma, nature can be satisfactorily explained according to natural causes, and therefore the present is the key to the past. This concept was introduced by James Hutton, popularized by Sir Charles Lyell, and greatly influenced the thoughts and works of Charles Darwin. Uniformitarianism has been the backbone of modern historical geology and is responsible for the current widespread assumption that the Earth is billions of years old. Consequently, the Earth has aged from just a few thousand years to about 5 billion years in a little more than a century. Present-day uniformitarianism geologists generally evince a hostile attitude toward biblical creationism and catastrophism. L. Merson Davies, a renowned British paleontologist who opposed the general theory of evolution, commented on this recent phenomenon and made some important observations. Here then we come face to face with a circumstance which cannot be ignored in dealing with this subject, namely the existence of a marked prejudice against the acceptance of belief in a cataclysm like the deluge. Now we should remember that up to 100 years ago, such a prejudice did not exist, as a general one at least. Belief in the deluge of Noah was axiomatic, not only in the church itself, both Catholic and Protestant, but in the scientific world as well. And yet the Bible stood committed to the prophecy that, in what it calls the last days, a very different philosophy would be found in the ascendant, a philosophy which would lead men to regard belief in the flood with disfavor and treat it as disproved, declaring that all things continue as from the beginning of creation. 2 Peter 3:3-6. In other words, a doctrine of uniformity in all things, a doctrine which the apostle obviously regarded as untrue to fact, was to replace belief in such cataclysms as the deluge. Thus, with the doctrine of uniformitarianism, Peter's ancient prophecy has at last been fulfilled before our own eyes. According to modern uniformitarians, there is no need to rely on any catastrophic events except on a minor scale. They insist that all geologic features and formations, once attributed to geologic cataclysms, can now be satisfactorily explained by ordinary processes functioning over long periods of time. Although the uniformitarian position appears to be reasonable, we must remember that it is merely an assumption and not a fact. Furthermore, it is an assumption which has been made in the construction of the geologic column, and in the pages that follow we intend to demonstrate that it is an inadequate mechanism in terms of explaining most geological features and formations. Instead, it will be shown that the geologic evidences support a universal hydraulic cataclysm. While uniformitarian evolutionists insist that the present is the key to the past, creationists argue that it is actually the past, the fall and redemption of man, that is the key to the present, the problems of the world today. 2. The geologic column. Among the sciences, historical geology is in a most awkward position in that it deals with past events and is thus forced to rely upon assumptions which may or may not be true. Documented history only goes back a few thousand years. The earliest authenticated written records date back to about 3500 BC. Prior to the existence of eyewitnesses, no one can be absolutely certain of what actually transpired. Consequently, there is no direct, irrefutable proof as to the process or processes which form the rocks of the geologic column or their age. Any such determination can only be indirect, based upon assumptions which may or may not be true. Nevertheless, based upon the assumptions that uniformitarianism and organic evolution were established scientific facts, geologists during the 19th century began to compile the geologic column. They arranged the Earth's strata according to the various types of fossils they contained, especially their index fossils, usually marine invertebrates, which are easily recognized, assumed to have been widespread in occurrence, and of limited chronological duration, thus marking a specific age determination for a rock formation. Strata with simpler fossils, presumed to have evolved first, were put on the bottom of the column, while strata containing more complex forms, presumed to have evolved later, were placed towards the top of the column. Thus, the entire geologic column was founded and built on the assumption that organic evolution was a fact. The fact that modern historical geology is based on the assumption of evolutionary biology is a blatant case of circular reasoning. The only basis for placing rock formations in chronological order is their fossil content, especially index fossils. The only justification for assigning fossils to specific time periods in that chronology is the assumed evolutionary progression of life. In turn, the only basis for biological evolution is the fossil record so constructed. In other words, the assumption of evolution is used to arrange the sequence of fossils. Then the resultant sequence is advanced as proof of evolution. Consequently, the primary evidence for evolution is the assumption of evolution. Since the arrangement of fossils is completely arbitrary, i.e., based on the assumption of evolution, the geologic column cannot be used to demonstrate evolution or a vast geologic age. It is important to realize that nowhere in the world does the geologic column actually occur. It exists only in the minds of evolutionary geologists. It is simply an ideal series of geologic systems, and not an actual column of rocks that can be observed at a particular locality. Real rock formations are characterized by gaps and reversals of this ideal imaginary sequence. Even the Grand Canyon only includes less than half of the geologic systems. In order to see the entire geologic column as it occurs in its proper sequential order, one would have to travel all over the world. Precambrian and Paleozoic strata can be seen at the Grand Canyon. Mesozoic strata can be observed in eastern Arizona. Tertiary formations are visible in New Mexico, and so on. In the field, every conceivable contradiction to the proposed ideal sequence of the geologic column is found. Anomalies, such as fossils in the wrong stratigraphic order, must be explained away if the basic assumption of evolution and the validity of the geologic column are to be salvaged. The evolutionary explanation for this phenomenon is as clever as it is convenient. Fossils found too low in the geologic column, i.e., before they were supposed to have evolved, are termed stratigraphic leaks. Specimens found too high in the geologic column are considered as reworked specimens. In many cases, huge thicknesses of sedimentary strata are found to be in the wrong stratigraphic order. Evolutionary geologists resort to secondary assumptions in order to explain such upside-down conditions. Older strata on top of younger strata. Overthrusting is one such imaginative concept which is used to account for such anomalies. For example, in Glacier National Park, there is a block of Precambrian limestone, supposedly 1 billion years old, on top of a Cretaceous shale formation, supposedly only 100 million years old. Geologists propose that this misplaced block has been moved horizontally over the adjacent region, driven by tremendous forces along thrust faults. But this misplaced block of limestone is about 350 miles long, 35 miles wide, and 6 miles thick. Dr. Henry M. Morris has demonstrated conclusively that such large-scale mechanical sliding would be physically impossible, even if the sliding planes were lubricated. The obvious conclusion is that the Precambrian rocks were actually deposited after the Cretaceous rocks, and that the geologic column and timetable of Earth history is basically meaningless. Such concepts as large-scale overthrusting are simply viewed by creationists as ploys to explain away the numerous contradictions encountered in the field. The fact that rock formations of the geologic column are arranged and dated by their fossil contents, especially their index fossil content, and not on the basis of radiometric dating techniques surprises most people. This common misconception is, however, easily dispelled by the simple fact that long before radioactive dating was ever imagined, the geologic column and approximate ages of all fossil-bearing strata were already established. Radiometric dates, which are estimated on certain rock formations, are usually discarded and never used at all due to the high probability of error inherent in this technique. This is especially true whenever such determinations disagree with the previously established dates. 3. Recent findings which contradict the geologic column. There are a number of known scientific facts which raise serious questions concerning the geologic column and timetable. One such example would be the existence of numerous contemporaneous human and dinosaur prints found in Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, Missouri, Kentucky, Illinois, and in other U.S. localities. These tracks are widely distributed and are usually only exposed by flood erosion or bulldozers. They have been carefully studied and verified by reliable paleontologists and cannot be dismissed as frauds. Furthermore, there are places in Arizona and Rhodesia where dinosaur pictographs have been found drawn on cave or canyon walls by man. The obvious implication is that man once lived contemporaneously with dinosaurs, contrary to the commonly accepted chronology of the geologic column and timetable. Job 40, 15 through 41, and 34 is an interesting reference in connection which seems to refer to land and marine dinosaurs living in Job's day. Five-toed llamas allegedly became extinct about 30 million years ago, according to the evolutionary framework. Yet archaeologists have found pottery with etchings of five-toed llamas on it. Skeletons of five-toed llamas have been found in association with the Tiahuanacan culture. An ancient Mayan relief sculpture of a bird resembling the Archaeopteryx has been found. This indicates a discrepancy of about 130 million years. If the geologic column is correct, the two should have never met. Apparently, the geologic column is in error. An amazing discovery was made by William Meister on June 1, 1968 in Utah. He found the fossils of several trilobites in the fossilized sandaled footprint of a man. But according to evolutionary timetable worked out in the geologic column, trilobites became extinct about 230 million years before the appearance of man. Thus, to find a modern, sandal-shod man existing contemporaneously with trilobites is utterly devastating to the geologic column and evolutionary framework. Dr. Clifford Burdick, a geologist, found additional evidence to support the hypothesis that man did indeed once live contemporaneously with trilobites. He discovered the footprints of a barefooted child, one of which contained a compressed trilobite. Naturally, evolutionary geologists have reacted to this evidence in a rather skeptical and evasive manner. If they accept this evidence, the credibility of the geologic column and timetable, which has been a dogma of geology for generations, would be shattered. Yet the evidence is real and cannot be denied or ignored any longer. Many other contradictions could be listed which raise serious questions concerning classical evolutionary thinking in the geologic column and timetable. For additional information concerning such contradictions, see Time Upside Down by Eric von Fange, 1974. Number 4. Radioactive dating. The belief in an ancient Earth has become so entrenched in our modern culture that advocates of a relatively young Earth are considered as antiquated as if they had proposed that the Earth were flat. In fact, it may even seem audacious to question the validity of radioactive dating. After all, haven't scientists proven that the Earth is billions of years old by these very methods? As was established earlier, the study of origins is beyond the reach of the scientific method. Therefore, dates obtained from these techniques are merely circumstantial and are necessarily based on numerous assumptions which may or may not be true. Thus, it is impossible to prove that the Earth is billions of years old. Radioactive dating techniques may be classified into two main categories. 1. Those whose information is limited to the last few thousand years, such as carbon-14, and 2, those which utilize radioactive elements such as uranium, lead, and potassium argon for determining dates supposedly stretching back into the millions and billions of years. In dating the Earth, scientists rely primarily on the uranium, lead, and potassium argon methods. Of these two, the uranium lead method is more important because it is the one against which the others have been calibrated. Consequently, it is the method which offers the primary support for the belief of an ancient Earth held to be around 4.5 to 5 billion years old. Regardless of the particular method utilized, dates obtained from these techniques are indeed circumstantial and based on a number of assumptions which we will now consider. When using radioactive dating techniques, the following assumptions must be made. Number 1, the rock contained no daughter product atoms in the beginning, only parent atoms. 2, since then, no parent or daughter atoms were either added to or taken away from the rock. And 3, the rate of radioactive decay has remained consistent. Depending on the particular method involved, other assumptions may be involved, but these 3 are always involved and are extremely important. Recognizing this fact, the dubious nature of radiometric dating techniques now becomes apparent, especially since none of these assumptions are found to be valid. First of all, there is no way to be absolutely certain that some daughter product atoms were not present in the rock in the beginning, since they are all found to be widely distributed in the Earth's crust. Secondly, heating and deforming of rocks can cause migration of the daughter and parent atoms. Percolation of water through the rocks can also cause these atoms to be transported and redeposited elsewhere. And finally, recent research suggests that certain conditions, exposure to neutrino, neutron, or cosmic radiation, may alter the rates of radioactive decay. Radioactive decay is also known to be proportional to the speed of light. And Barry Setterfield has recently shown that the speed of light has not remained fixed, but has actually decreased. This decrease in the speed of light suggests that the decay of radioactive material in the rocks in the past would be much greater than it is today. Thus, the high decay rates of the past would account for the apparent vast age of the rocks. The fact that erroneous results can be and often are derived from these dating techniques has been experimentally verified. For example, living snails have been dated as 2,300 years old by the carbon-14 method. Wood taken from growing trees has been dated by the carbon-14 method to be 10,000 years old. Hawaiian lava flows, which are known to be less than 200 years old, have been dated by the potassium argon method at up to 3 billion years old. These scientists would do well to ponder the question that God put to Job. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Job 38. Considering the unreliability of these dating techniques, there is no valid scientific reason why one should place any confidence in them, especially since there is such an immense amount of extrapolation involved. Consequently, we will now consider other processes which can also be used to measure time and thus date the Earth. 5. Processes which indicate a young Earth. A significant amount of research has been accumulated which suggests that the Earth and solar system are relatively young and not ancient, as evolutionists have assumed. The following processes are usually selectively screened out by evolutionists who choose to ignore or discard them, because they indicate a relatively young age for the Earth and solar system. A. The Earth's magnetic field. The strength of the Earth's magnetic field has been measured for well over a century. This provides scientists with exceptionally good records. In an important recent study, Dr. Thomas G. Barnes has shown that the strength of the Earth's magnetic field is decaying exponentially at a rate corresponding to a half-life of 1,400 years. That is to say, 1,400 years ago, the magnetic field of the Earth was twice as strong as it is now. If we extrapolate back as far as 10,000 years, we find that the Earth would have had a magnetic field as strong as that of a magnetic star. This is, of course, highly improbable, if not impossible. Thus, based on the present decay rate of the Earth's magnetic field, 10,000 years appears to be an upper limit for the age of the Earth. Keep in mind that any objections to this conclusion must be based on rejection of the same uniformitarianism assumption which evolutionists utilize to derive a great age for the Earth. In defense of their long age chronology, evolutionists have proposed a reversal hypothesis. They suggest that the Earth's magnetic field has remained relatively stable throughout geologic time, except for certain intervals in which it went through a reversal, dying down to zero and rising up again with the reverse polarity. The last such reversal is alleged to have occurred about 700,000 years ago. Unfortunately for evolutionary scientists, the reversal hypothesis has absolutely no valid scientific theoretical basis. Furthermore, rock magnetization cannot be used to support these so-called reversals because there is a self-reversal process known to exist in rocks, completely independent of the Earth's magnetic field. Finally, it is believed that the Earth's magnetic field is due to the circulating electric currents in its core. If we extrapolate backward about 20,000 years, we find that the estimated heat produced by the currents would have melted the Earth. Clearly, the testimony of the Earth's magnetic field is strongly in favor of a relatively young Earth, not an ancient one. B. Meteoric dust. Scientists have known for some time now that cosmic dust particles enter the Earth's atmosphere from space at an essentially constant rate. Eventually, these dust particles settle down to the Earth's surface. Hans Petersen has made accurate measurements of this influx and has determined that the Earth receives about 14 million tons per year. Now, if it is true that the Earth is around 5 billion years old, as evolutionists insist, there should be a layer of meteoric dust that is about 182 feet thick all over the world. No such dust layer exists anywhere, of course. Even on the moon, where it should be at least this thick, little sign of it was found by the astronauts, about 1/8 of an inch. The fear that the astronauts would sink into such a layer of meteoric dust when they landed on the moon proved to be completely unwarranted. Evolutionary geologists might be tempted to argue that erosional and mixing processes can account for the absence of the meteoric dust layer. However, this explanation is unsatisfactory and easily refuted, as the composition of meteoric dust is very distinctive, particularly in its content of nickel and iron. For example, nickel is a very rare element in the Earth's crust, and even more scarce in the ocean. But the average nickel content of meteoric dust is approximately 300 times as great as in the Earth's crust. Calculations based on the relatively small amount of nickel found in the Earth's crust and ocean indicate an age for the Earth of only a few thousand years. C. The Mississippi River Delta. The Mississippi River Delta offers additional evidence to support the concept of a relatively young Earth. Approximately 300 million cubic yards of sediment are deposited into the Gulf of Mexico by the Mississippi River each year. By carefully studying the volume and rate of accumulation of the Mississippi River Delta, and then dividing the weight of the sediments deposited annually into the total weight of the delta, It can be determined that the age of the delta is about 4,000 years old. D. Petroleum and natural gas. Petroleum and natural gas are contained at high pressures in underground reservoirs by relatively impermeable cap rock. In many cases, the pressures are extremely high. Calculations based upon the measured permeability of the cap rock revealed that the oil and gas pressures could not be maintained for much longer than 10,000 years in many instances. Thus, the generalization that such fossil fuel deposits have been confined for millions of years, having not leaked out through their cap rock, becomes preposterous. Furthermore, recent experiments have demonstrated conclusively that the conversion of marine and vegetal matter into oil and gas can be achieved in a surprisingly short time. For example, plant-derived material has been converted into a good grade of petroleum in as little as 20 minutes under the proper temperature and pressure conditions. Wood and other cellulosic material have also been converted into coal or coal-like substances in just a few hours. These experiments prove that the formation of coal, oil, and gas did not necessarily require millions of years to form, as uniformitarian geologists have assumed and taught. Creationists believe that the great coal deposits of the world are the transported and metamorphosed remains of the extensive vegetation and antediluvian world. This catastrophic interpretation is further supported by the presence of polystrate fossils in coal beds, which indicate rapid formation. Also, the type of plants involved and the texture of these deposits testify of turbulent waters, not a stagnant swamp. Evolutionists propose that coal was formed millions of years before man evolved. However, human skeletons and artifacts such as intricately structured gold chains have been found in coal deposits. In Genesis 4, we learn that metalworking was already highly developed. Tubal-Cain was an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. In Genesis 7 and 8, the deluge buried the antediluvian civilizations in the sedimentary layers of the Earth's crust. E. The rotation of the Earth. The rotation of the Earth is gradually slowing due to the gravitational drag forces of the Sun, Moon, and other factors. If the Earth is billions of years old, as uniformitarian geologists insist, and it has been slowing down uniformly, then its present rotation should be zero. Furthermore, if we extrapolate backwards for several billion years, the centrifugal force would have been so great that the continents would have been sent to the equatorial regions, and the overall shape of the Earth would have been a flat pancake. But, as is commonly known, the shape of the Earth is spherical. Its continents are not confined to the equatorial regions, and it continues to rotate on its axis at approximately 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. The obvious conclusion is that the Earth is not billions of years old. F. The recession of the Moon. A very simple proof that the Earth and Moon are relatively young is found in the recession of the Moon from the Earth. The present rate of recession of the Moon is known and clearly indicates a young age for the Earth-Moon system. The basic problem with which evolutionists have to contend is that the Moon is presently much too close to the Earth. Calculations based on the known recession speed of the Moon and presumed evolutionary age of 4 to 5 billion years require that the Moon should be much farther away from the Earth than it is. Obviously, the Earth-Moon system is not as old as evolutionary scientists have assumed. The vast time span essential for the presumed evolution of life forms is apparently mythological and non-existent. G. Atmospheric helium. Another excellent evidence for the young Earth is provided by the small amount of helium in our present-day atmosphere. Evolutionists maintain that the radioactive decay processes of uranium and thorium that produce helium have been occurring in the Earth's crust for billions of years. But if this decay has been going on for billions of years, the Earth's atmosphere should contain much more than the present 1 part in 200,000 of helium. The common explanation offered for the absence of the required helium is that it has been escaping out through the exosphere. But there is no evidence to support this assumption, and in fact, recent data indicate that helium cannot escape into space the way hydrogen does. To make matters worse for the somewhat discouraged evolutionist, it is also probable that helium is actually entering the atmosphere from outer space by means of the sun's corona. Realistic calculations based on available figures disclose that the amount of time required for natural alpha decay process to have produced the observed helium is approximately 10,000 years. H. Pleochoric halos. Creationists point to the evidence from study of rapidly decaying radioactive elements in pleochoric halos to support their belief that creation was sudden and complete. Dr. Robert Gentry, the world's leading authority on radio halos, has studied the mysterious case of polonium radio halos extensively and reached some startling conclusions which confirm the creationist's viewpoint. Polonium-218 has been considered a daughter element of the natural decay of uranium. But through the works of Dr. Gentry and other researchers, polonium halos have been found in mica and fluorite without any evidence of parents. In other words, it was primordial, present in the original granite from the very beginning. Also, and most significantly, polonium halos should not exist at all because of their extremely short half-lives. Polonium-218 has a half-life of only 3 minutes. If the evolutionists' interpretation was correct, and the rock formations gradually cooled over millions of years, the polonium would have decayed into other elements long ago. Thus, the evidence clearly points to an instantaneous crystallization of the host basement rocks of the Earth, concurrent with the formation of the polonium. Simply stated, the presence of polonium radiohalos is one of the greatest blows to evolutionary thinking because it speaks so eloquently of instantaneous creation. While these facts raise absolute havoc with the evolutionary framework, they are in complete harmony with the creationist viewpoint. As the scriptures record, the evening and the morning were the first day. Genesis 1:5. The deliberate and emphatic repetition of this phrase throughout Genesis 1 clearly indicates that these were literal 24-hour creative periods. The creation was accomplished in 6 literal days, not through billions of years of gradual development. Exodus 20:11. How appropriate are the words of the psalmists at this juncture. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. Psalm 33, 6 and 9. I. Population growth. Another process that offers convincing evidence for a relatively young Earth is that of population growth. Evolutionists believe that man has been on the Earth for at least 1 million years, whereas creationists believe that he has been around for only a few thousand years. The question then becomes, which possibility is better supported by the data from population growth statistics? Dr. Henry M. Morris has calculated that an average growth of only 0.5% per year, which is 1/4 the present rate, would yield the present population in just 4,000 years. This allows ample room for periods of time when, because of war or disease, the population growth rates were far below the normal averages. Dr. Morris points out that it is statistically inconceivable that only 3.5 billion people could have resulted from 1 million years of evolutionary history. Even if the population increased at only 0.5% per year for 1 million years, the number of people in the present generation would exceed 10 to the 2,100th power. To fully appreciate the ludicrous nature of the evolutionary model in this regard, Consider the fact that only 10 to the 130th power electrons can be packed into the entire universe. Talk about crowded. Obviously, the creation model of human chronology offers the more reasonable figures on man's iniquity. Man's history clearly spans only thousands of years, not millions.